Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We're on our second week of the Monday experiment where I've moved the show to Monday, and I got more than one comment when I said I was moving the show saying that this show would become absolutely useless if I moved it to Monday and used the estimates. But looking back at last week's show, I actually don't have any corrections or adjustments to make from what I reported last week. The top 10 stayed the same, the rankings stayed the same, the per theater average stayed the same, which sort of backs up what I was saying, which is that this is still basically the same show. The numbers usually are right around where the estimates are. Yes, I will have to go back to make some corrections, not this week, but I'm sure in some future weeks, and I'm happy to do that. But I'm also happy to maybe grow the show's audience a little bit, find some new people here on Mondays. So let's look at this past box office weekend, which looks like it was the real kickoff to the summer movie box office. I know that The Fall Guy was technically the kickoff, but after those disappointing numbers last weekend, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes did a little bit better. I should say a lot better, especially when you look at it compared to people's expectations. It was the number one movie of the weekend at $56.5 million estimated. I've seen some reporting late tonight as I was compiling the numbers for the show that it could come in closer to $57.5 or $58 million, which would be great. Anytime a movie comes in above estimates, that means that there is audience enthusiasm for it. However, if that does happen, it would be kind of an anomaly because the cinema score on Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was pretty low. It got a B cinema score, which is lower than any of the other three new Planet of the Apes films. They all got an A-. Tim Burton's 2001 Planet of the Apes, which is really not liked by audience members, got a B-, which is just one grade lower. I was surprised to see that lower B cinema score. Something about that opening night audience, they just weren't as enthusiastic about this movie, but we're not seeing that borne out in these opening weekend results just yet. We'll see what happens next weekend if that carries over, but cinema score is not a perfect one-to-one thing, but it often is fairly indicative or fairly accurate about audience response, especially on opening night, which is when they do those cinema score compilations. But it really seems to be kind of out of whack from what we're seeing with the box office and what we're hearing from opening night audiences. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. Planet of the Apes was number one. The Fall Guy falls to number two. It dropped 51% in its second weekend for a $13.7 million weekend frame. Just under $50 million domestic, according to the estimates. Challengers stays in third place. It drops 38.3% in weekend number three for a $4.6 million total and a $38 million domestic total. Then we have Taro in fourth place at $3.4 million and a $12 million domestic total. It stays in fourth place. And Godzilla Kong: The New Empire stays in fifth place in its seventh week of release. It drops 44.4%, a $2.5 million total for a domestic total at $191.8 million. And before we get deeper into Planet of the Apes, something I actually wanted to point out regarding how I read off the box office numbers. I've gotten the same response or comment several times when you look at something like Challengers and I say $4.6 million. Some people say, well, wait, Challengers made $4.684 million. Why do you say 4.6? Why aren't you rounding up to 4.7? It's not a round up. I'm not rounding when I say $4.6 million. I'm abbreviating the number so I don't have to say 4.684 or $4.68 million. I'm literally just abbreviating at the first digit. And I know some people might be listening to this or watching this saying like, Dan, why are you explaining this? I'm telling you, I have heard this a lot from people saying that it bothers them that I don't round the numbers up, that if it's $4.68 million, I don't say $4.7 million. The way that I explained it to a commenter last week is don't think of it as me rounding the number, think of it as me abbreviating the number. So that's why I say $4.6 million, even if it made $4.68 million. These are the things that you have to respond to. I mean, listen, I do box office shows. I want people to think that I'm giving the numbers accurately, and well, that's part of it. All right, let's take a deeper dive into this opening weekend for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. You can see here that it had the fourth best domestic opening of the year. If it ends up in that $58 million range, like people are saying that it could, it would maybe jump over Kung Fu Panda 4 to be the third best opening of the year. And should it get into that $58 million range, of course, I will come back and correct this chart with the accurate numbers, but the estimates put it in fourth place. It's very close to third place. Looking at this top five, it's actually a good year to make a movie about animals. Godzilla, Kong, The New Empire, Kung Fu Panda 4, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, 2, 3, and 4 on the domestic opening list this year, and all based around animals, much beloved animals. We have Dune Part 2, still with the best domestic opening of the year at $82.5 million. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire drops to fifth place with the fifth best domestic opening of the year. Looking at Planet of the Apes openings since the year 2000, we don't have the data for the older movies in the 60s and 70s, but we do from the 2000s onward. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes currently has the highest opening for an Apes film in the 21st century at $72.6 million back in the summer of 2014. 10 years ago, it's hard to believe that we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of that movie. Tim Burton's 2001 Planet of the Apes comes in second place at $68.5 million back in the summer of 2001. Then we have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which opens at $56.5 million, just above War for the Planet of the Apes. If it sticks to that projection or exceeds it, then it'll open up that space a little bit. War for the Planet of the Apes opened to $56.2 million back in July of 2017, and Rise of the Planet of the Apes opened to $54.8 million back in August of 2011. But because we're going back about 20 years or so, let's see what these numbers look like when you adjust for inflation. Adjusted for inflation, Tim Burton takes the crown with a $120.9 million adjusted opening for 2001's Planet of the Apes. It opened big, although audiences didn't like it much. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes falls down to second place at $95.7 million adjusted. Then we have Rise of the Planet of the Apes at $76 million, War for the Planet of the Apes at $71.6 million, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes actually coming in fifth at $56.5 million or thereabout. So when you look at the numbers adjusted, you see there is a little bit more distance between the three newer films and this one. We'll see how it does in the weeks ahead with that cinema score, where it ends up on the final domestic list for these Apes movies. But if they can keep the budget responsible, and it sounded like the budget was pretty responsible on this movie, they can keep making them as long as audience interest doesn't drop off of a cliff. And I imagine what they want to do with this movie is to have a movie like Rise of the Planet of the Apes that does well and then generates a sequel like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes that does much, much better. You don't want things to keep going downhill. That's not the direction any franchise wants to go. We do have box office data for the final totals on all of the Planet of the Apes films, so let's look at the franchise tracker for all 10 theatrical movies. You can see that Dawn of the Planet of the Apes has the highest domestic box office total at $208.5 million, followed by 2001's Planet of the Apes at $180 million. Rise of the Planet of the Apes comes in third place at $176.7 million. War for the Planet of the Apes, which was so much better than this domestic total, $146.8 million. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is already the fifth highest grossing Planet of the Apes film due to the fact that half of them came out in the late 60s and early 70s. So it's there with its $56.5 million total. Then we have the first five Apes movies in release order. Planet of the Apes from 1968 in sixth place at $33.3 million. Then Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes. You can see that is a franchise that did take a step down every time when it got to those box office totals. But we are talking about 50 plus years of box office history here. So, we definitely want to adjust for inflation. And when we adjust all of the Planet of the Apes movies for inflation, this is what it looks like. Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes is actually the highest grossing Apes film domestically adjusted for inflation at $317.6 million, followed by 1968's Planet of the Apes at just shy of $300 million. Then we have 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes at $275 million, Rise of the Planet of the Apes at $245 million, and War for the Planet of the Apes at $187.1 million. Then we have the four 1970s films, Beneath the Planet of the Apes with an adjusted total of $140.7 million, Escape from the Planet of the Apes at $94.8 million, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes at $72.4 million, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes at $61.9 million, which currently puts Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes after its opening weekend in 10th place out of 10, although of course it is going to start climbing up this list rapidly as it continues its domestic run. But that's just the case, and why I like to adjust for inflation, because it does give you some context, especially historically, for these franchises that have been going on for so long, just where these newer movies fall, or at least an idea. It's not a perfect metric. There is no perfect metric, but it's an idea of how these films stack up against each other historically. One other quick note I wanted to make regarding Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. It is coming to the end of its box office run, and the real question is, does it have about $8.2 million left in the tank in order to bypass 2014's Godzilla to take the crown as the highest grossing domestic MonsterVerse film coming out of Legendary? I don't know. I think it's going to be very close, but it's something that I will keep tracking as Godzilla Kong: The New Empire marches out of theaters. Let's look at numbers 6 through 10 for this past weekend. At number 6 is Unsung Hero, which dropped 24.7%. That's more like it for an A+ Cinema Score film. In its third week of release, $2.25 million total for a domestic total of $16.7 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 spends a 10th week in the domestic top 10 with a 20.5% drop in a $2 million weekend. Its domestic total is now at $191.1 million. Civil War drops 49.2% in weekend number 5 for another $1.8 million and a $65 million domestic total. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace 25th anniversary re-release. The vast majority of the audience obviously went to see it last weekend because it dropped 82.8% in weekend number 2. It was just a big Star Wars Day weekend thing for a lot of people. Not a whole lot of people that wanted to go over Mother's Day weekend. $1.5 million for a $12 million total there. And in 10th place is Abigail, which drops 42.8% in weekend number 4 for a $1.1 million total. A domestic total right now of $24.7 million. Now, one movie that you don't see in the domestic top 10 was a parody film, a parody of Tyler Perry movies that was called Not Another Church Movie. It had reportedly a $0 advertising budget, and it had one of the worst openings ever for a film that played in 1,000 or more theaters. It was technically a wide release. And let's look at just how close that race is. These are the 5 worst openings of all time, at least by the research that I could find and verify, for movies opening in 1,000 theaters or more, excluding re-releases largely during the pandemic. The worst opening for a movie in 1,000 theaters or more goes to an abortion drama called Call Jane, starring Elizabeth Banks and Sigourney Weaver, which opened in 1,068 theaters in October of 2022 and only made $244,000. In second place was a movie called Transylmania, which opened in 1,007 theaters back in December of 2009. It made $263,000. It was a horror comedy that obviously should have gone straight to video. It has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. In third place is a movie called National Champions, which opened in December of 2021 and made just over $300,000 in 1,197 theaters. This was a sports drama that was basically dumped by STX as their last release on the way to bankruptcy. In fourth place was Creature, a super low-budget monster movie that somehow opened in wide release, 1,500 theaters, the widest release on this list. It made $327,000 on its opening weekend back in September of 2011. And then in fifth place is a movie called Sweetwater. It's a sports drama that opened up against Renfield last April. It made about $500,000 total on an $8 million budget and only made $351,000 opening in 1,204 theaters. The estimate on Not Another Church Movie is $360,000 in over 1,000 theaters. So if those estimates are off by even $9,000, then it could very easily be on this chart as one of the worst ever openings for a movie in 1,000 theaters or more. And should that final number put it on the chart, of course, next week, I will come back and give you the accurate data. Dropping out of the top 10 this past weekend was just one movie. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, after 7 weeks, is out of the domestic top 10, and its theatrical run will probably end fairly soon. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for the past weekend, Abigail had the biggest swing, either adding theaters or losing theaters. They're all theater losses this week. Abigail lost 997 theaters. It remains in 1,641. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare lost another 960 theaters. theaters. It's still in wide release, but barely, at 1,108. Challengers lost 868 theaters. It's now playing in 2,609. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire lost 607 theaters. It's still in 1,418 nationwide. And Unsung Hero lost 560 theaters, although it's still in over 2,272 to be precise. Looking at what I call the road to recovery, the blue line there is the weekend average for 2015 through 2019 pre-pandemic. The red line is the weekend average for 2021 to 2023, and the dotted black line is the box office weekend for this year. And you can see that after a few weeks of being under where we were, even after theaters reopened in 2021 and onwards, we just got barely back above that red line thanks to Planet of the Apes. Although, again, we're still not in a great place and we're far below where we were on average before the pandemic. The highest grossing film for the window from 2021 to 2023 was last year, the second weekend of Guardians of the Galaxy. The highest grossing window for 2015 through 2019 was the opening of Captain America Civil War. The way the calendar fell, the opening week in May was week 16 instead of week 15, which is where it fell or how it fell this year. So this is where it gets a little weird sometimes with box office analysis, which is why I say I give you a lot of numbers so we can get a big overall picture. Turning now to the top 5 films outside of the domestic marketplace, which is the US and Canada. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was a true day-and-date release around the world. It made $72.5 million outside of the domestic marketplace. The Garfield movie, which still doesn't open here for another couple weeks, was number 2 at $11.8 million. Then we had Twilight of the Warriors Walled In, which is still playing just in China at $9.4 million. I should say $9.457 million because it was very close between that movie and The Fall Guy, which came in at $9.435 million. That's one time where I can't just abbreviate. And then in 5th place with the Chinese film The Last Frenzy at $8.5 million. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, you get the top 5 films worldwide, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes ruled the planet at $129 million. That number might go up just a little bit if those actual numbers come in higher than the estimates. The Fall Guy comes in 2nd place at $11.8 million, followed by the Garfield movie at $9.457, Twilight of the Warriors Walled In at $9.435, and Challengers in 5th place at $8.8 million. Some of these holds are decent, some of them not so much. The Fall Guy drops 57.1% worldwide from last weekend. That's not a great hold, worse really than it did domestically. The Garfield movie drops 46.4%. We'll see if that success or the way that it's building that momentum overseas translates to its domestic opening here. Twilight of the Warriors drops 57.4%. That's not bad for a movie playing in China. And Challengers dropping 41.1% worldwide. Also not too bad of a result. Looking at the best worldwide debuts for Hollywood films this year, Godzilla Kong the New Empire still has the number 1 spot at $194 million. Dune Part 2 is in 2nd place at $182.5 million. But Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes had the 3rd best debut for a Hollywood film this year at $129 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 has dropped down to 4th place at $80.2 million, and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire drops down to 5th place at $61.4 million. Looking at the legendary MonsterVerse grosses worldwide, it's getting even closer between Godzilla Kong the New Empire and Kong Skull Island. Godzilla Kong the New Empire is now under $10 million away from eclipsing Kong Skull Island to become the highest grossing MonsterVerse movie worldwide. I think that should probably happen either this week or next week. I think it can cobble together another $10 million worldwide. So if we need to coronate Godzilla Kong, we will do that in the next week or two. We've got a lot more to cover, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsors for this week's show. Today's show is brought to you by Factor. The summer is calling, which means a lot of folks are pushing for those last-minute fitness goals in time to hit the beach, the pool, or just the mirror. And Factor is great for anyone looking to meet their wellness goals this summer with their chef-crafted meals that include options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. With over 30 different dietitian-approved meals and add-ons to choose from each week, Factor helps keep you fueled from breakfast to dessert with easy, nutritious options. We're talking restaurant-quality meals like filet mignon and salmon, salmon, all ready in 2 minutes without having to worry about shopping, prep, cooking, or cleanup. When it comes to starting a healthy routine, a lot of people say they just don't have the time. Well, time isn't a factor with Factor because you'll always have the time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Every week, you can get as many or as few meals as you need, and you can pause or reschedule your delivery anytime. Head to factormeals.com/Murrell50 and use the code Murrell50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. That's code Murrell50 at factormeals.com/Murrell50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. Today's show is brought to you by Mando. The weather's heating up, and for some people that means pool season, but for me it means sweat season. And I hate having to worry that my deodorant isn't doing its job and I might be stinking up the joint. What if I smell bad and no one else will tell me? Should I see a psychologist to talk about these neuroses? Yes, and it's already done. But on top of that, I'm also using Mando, which helps to set my mind at ease. Mando whole body deodorant is made with mandelic acid, which blocks the sweat-eating bacteria on your skin from causing odor. I put it on every day, just like other deodorants, and I go on my way worry-free. I even have some body wash with a great bourbon leather smell for when I'm getting clean, and some deodorant wipes in case I feel like I need them throughout the day. Everything smells great, and most important, it works. If you're new to Mando, their starter pack is perfect for you. You get a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like mini body wash or deodorant wipes, and free shipping. Luckily, I have a discount code to help you get hooked on my favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use code DAN at shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com. Let's take a look now at the summer box office. As I do every year, I made my predictions as to the 10 highest grossing domestic releases, and this is how it's shaping up so far. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes jumps right to the top of the list. Right now, it's the number 1 movie of the summer at $56.5 million. The Fall Guy drops down to number 2. It's still just under $50 million. Star Wars Episode 1, the re-release, drops down to 3rd place at $12 million. Tarot drops down to 4th place, and because it was a wide release, Not Another Church Movie is on this list because that is the criteria for it to be on the 2024 summer box office list. So $360,000, good enough for the 5th highest grossing movie of the summer right now. So if every other movie is basically pulled off the schedule for the rest of the summer, Not Another Church Movie maybe has a chance to be a top 10 summer movie, but let's be honest, it's not happening. Looking at my predictions versus the actual box office results so far, I did predict Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes to be one of the 5 highest grossing movies of the summer. So it's in yellow over there on the left side where you can see my predictions. It's yellow right now because I picked it to be in the top 10, but currently it's at number 1, whereas I picked it to be number 5. So if I pick the movie in the top 10, but it's in the incorrect placement, it'll be in yellow. Any movies that are eliminated will be in red. And if I get one that's in the top 10 and in the right place, it'll be green. I don't usually have a lot of green movies, but I do from time to time. The next movies opening that I picked to be on my summer top 10 are Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, and the Garfield movie, which both open on Memorial Day weekend in a couple weeks. So we'll see how I fare there. Looking at the top per theater averages, turning to some specialty box office charts for this past weekend, it's one of those rare weeks, unless something comes in today, where Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is a wide release that also has the best per theater average, $13,865 per theater in 4,075 theaters. Wildcat sticks around in 2nd place. It brought in $12,000 in 6 theaters. I Saw the TV Glow brought in $9,291. The Indian film Shinda Shinda No Papa, which is a Punjabi language movie about an unruly kid taken to India to learn discipline, comes in 4th place at $4,775 in 102 theaters. And then The Fall Guy rounds out the top 5, bringing in $3,418 in 4,008 theaters. Looking at the top 5 films in limited release, this would be 1,000 theaters or fewer. At number 1 was a live presentation of the Met Opera of Madame Butterfly. It made just over $1 million in 732 theaters. Playing in just over 100 theaters was Shinda Shinda No Papa, which brought in $487,000. I Saw the TV Glow comes in 3rd place, bringing in $195,000, followed by Wicked Little Letters, which expanded to 520 theaters and brought in around $175,000, and Dragon Keeper, which is still in an unknown number of theaters and brought in $173,000. There are some changes on the 2024 annual domestic box office. So these are the top grossing films that were released this year. Dune Part 1 remains number one at $281.6 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire overtakes Kung Fu Panda 4 to become the second highest grossing domestic film of the year at $191.8 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 is at $191.1 million, now down at number 3. Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire stays in fourth place, the only other domestic movie so far to bypass $100 million. Although Planet of the Apes will be right behind it, it's at $111.3 million. Bob Marley: One Love is in fifth place at $96.8 million, followed by Mean Girls, The Beekeeper, and Civil War. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes enters the chart at number 9 for 2024 with $56.5 million, and The Fall Guy enters the chart at number 10 with $49.6 million. Argyle and Madam Web, two of the movies that I saw this year, are both out of the 2024 domestic top 10. Looking at the worldwide box office for this year, Dune Part 2 is at number 1 at $708.8 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is in second place at $558.7 million. Kung Fu Panda 3 is in third place at $529.2 million. Then we drop out of the $500 million club where we have 4 Chinese films: YOLO, Pegasus 2, Article 20, and Boonie Bear's Time Twist. Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire is in 8th place. Bob Marley: One Love is in 9th, and The Beekeeper is in 10th, although we should start seeing movies pop up on this pretty quickly, starting with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes next week. Before we go, as always, I like to take a look at a weekend in box office history, and we're going back 15 years, believe it or not, to the reintroduction of one of my favorite franchises of all time, 2009's Star Trek, which debuted on the weekend of May 8th through the 10th, 2009. It opened to $79.2 million. It had a domestic total of $257.7 million, and it spawned 2 sequels, but it's been 8 years since Star Trek Beyond, which is already the biggest gap between movies since the franchise started back in 1979. There was a 7-year gap between Star Trek Nemesis and 2009 Star Trek. We have now bypassed that, and there's really no indication of a pending Star Trek film anytime soon. It's all been streaming and stuff, but I miss Star Trek movies because I love Star Trek and I like to see it on the big screen. And Star Trek 09 was such a promising start to that franchise, and yet it managed to basically sputter out after just 2 more movies. In second place was X-Men Origins Wolverine, the movie that introduced us, for better or for worse, and I would say for worse, to Ryan Reynolds as Wade Wilson / Deadpool. Again, 15 years ago. That's hard to believe. Its second week saw a 69% drop. Man, the word got out quick about that movie. At $26.4 million, its domestic total ended up at $179.8 million. And of course, we'll see both Deadpool and Wolverine together in a movie this summer. Ghost of Girlfriends Past, a pre-reconnaissance Matthew McConaughey rom-com, in its second week dropped 33.4% for a $10.2 million total. Its domestic final was around $55.2 million. Idris Elba, before he was a huge star, was with Beyonce Knowles and Ali Larter in a drama called Obsessed, which dropped 45.6% in its third week for a $6.5 million weekend. Its domestic total ended up around $68.2 million. And in fifth place was 17 again. It dropped 33.5% in week 4. This starred Zac Efron and, of course, the late Matthew Perry. $4.2 million on the weekend, a $64.1 million domestic total. But even going back just 15 years, it's very interesting to hit that inflation button and see what those numbers look like in today's money. And so when we adjust for inflation, we see that Star Trek opened to an adjusted total of $115.3 million with a $375 million total domestic final. X-Men Origins Wolverine came in second place at $38.4 million and a domestic adjusted total of $261.8 million. That's what a box office disaster looked like 15 years ago. The movie only brought in $261.8 million adjusted for inflation. Ghost of Girlfriends Past comes in third place at $14.9 million and an $80 million adjusted total. Then we have Obsessed, which brought in $9.5 million adjusted and had a total of just under $100 million. And then we have 17 again at $6.1 million and an adjusted final domestic total of $93.4 million. And that does it for Charts with Dan this week. We have a few different movies hitting theaters this weekend. The John Krasinski directed, Ryan Reynolds starring film If will be hitting theaters. I'm going to have a review for that later this week. Some people said I was wrong to not put this on my top 10 movie list for this summer. We'll see how it does. An original IP in the summer could do great, could do not so great. The Strangers Chapter 1 will also be opening this weekend. I guess there are plans for like a new trilogy or however many numbers of Strangers films, but if you weren't happy enough with the Strangers movies that we have so far, well, guess what? There's another one coming out. The Amy Winehouse pick Back to Black will also be hitting theaters this weekend. It has not come in off a very good buzz from the markets where it's already open, but we'll see if audiences embrace it. And then I Saw the TV Glow, which I've talked about here on the show for the last couple weeks. We'll be doing a big expansion this weekend, so if you want to see the movie and it hasn't been in a market near you, check your local listings, I love saying that, because it very well may be playing in your town this weekend. As always, thanks so much for tuning into the show here on Mondays, and stay tuned right here to the channel for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. I did a streaming charts episode yesterday talking about the first week episodes for Fallout on Amazon Prime, so if you haven't had enough numbers yet, I have a whole slew of other charts that I did on that show yesterday, and then going forward, you never really know what's going to pop up. I'm definitely going to review If later this week. I'm also planning to talk about X-Men 97, which is coming to a conclusion with their season finale this week. There's been a lot of great stuff in the show that I'm excited to talk about. Plus, you never know what's going to happen. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks to our sponsors. Check out the description below for more about Mando and Factor. And as always, until next time, stay safe. Bye.